Right.
So is it your responsibility then to speak up?
Yes, it is your responsibility to speak up, but what I could say here is, while it is your responsibility to speak up, not everyone has been equipped to speak up. Some people have not been empowered enough to speak up. If you've been beaten down, if your spirit has been lowered so much, and maybe you've spoken up before in the past, you might feel like it is not, you know, who's gonna listen to me anyway?
If it doesn't sit right, it probably is not right.
The Dim Din Podcast, a safe space to talk about misconceptions, perceptions, assumptions, and frustrations. Join us for conversations and stories that explore how embracing our differences leads to a balanced, strong, and harmonious world.
Domestic violence in the African diaspora community. This is a subject that is way overdue to be discussed on the Dim Din podcast. I remember growing up, there was a friend of mine that I had that would sit down, like in high school, sit down to tell us stories about her and her boyfriend. And we were always so excited to hear the stories because she would tell us how this boyfriend was chasing her down the streets when she did or did not do something and would beat her up sometimes. And the makeup aspect of it was what we all looked forward to. And that's a sort of like the type of idea of love that some of us grew up around. So domestic violence really is sort of like a strange language and concept to those of us who migrated here in the diaspora. To some of us, not all of us. But we're here to talk about that today, what it is, how it shows up. And to have this conversation with me today, I have the beautiful Dr. Miriam, who is originally from Uganda. We're going all the way to Uganda today.
Yes.
I'm excited for that. She's a mother, she's a wife, and she's a community educator.
Yes.
Welcome to the Dim Din podcast.
Thank you for having me.
You are welcome. I'm so excited to have you. Did I miss anything? Is there any other thing you want to tell people about yourself?
I'm a community educator. I was trained as a teacher in Uganda, and I taught in high school, or what we called secondary school in Uganda. Then I migrated here, and we could talk about my journey to try and translate my education to education here, but you know, that's a whole other podcast. But yeah, I graduated here, my master's, and then completed my doctorate in education as well. And so I have done teaching. I've done substitute teaching at the high school level here, and I've done university teaching, and yeah.
Beautiful.
Now I just love providing education to the community.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, it's a honor to have you on the podcast.
My pleasure. Pleasure.
Surprise! It is only me, Becca, your Dim Din podcast host. I am so grateful that you stopped by to watch this video. And I thank you for your time, your effort, and the love that you've shown towards Dim Din podcast so far. Now, I need you to please make time, like the video, leave a comment so that myself, YouTube, and the rest of the people watching this will know how you feel about it. And don't forget to subscribe. If you haven't subscribed yet, you only get to subscribe once, and it's completely free. I also now have the membership. So if you want to be a member, and it comes with a few perks, of course, then don't forget to click join. But until I see you again, thank you so very much. And I love you. Mwah. I was scrolling through the Watts webpage or something of the sort, and I saw an article that you wrote on guiding children amidst the storm of domestic violence. And I was like, I need to speak with her. So that was why I reached out to you. Can you tell us a little bit about how you came about writing that article and what was the intent behind it?
Yes, so one of the things that I've really grown into, or that has called me, is the area of parenting. And so when I was invited to write an article for that newsletter, which was focused on domestic violence, at first I paused because domestic violence itself is not my area of expertise, but parenting is. And so naturally for me, I gravitated towards the victims or the silent sufferers. I call them silent sufferers because many times when what is now known as intimate partner violence occurs, if there are children in the picture, there is very little. It's easy to just take the kids away, or for partners to fight maybe out of sight. But there are those little flies on the wall, the children who are listening, who are hearing, who can see changes in the energy in the home, and how maybe mom tenses up. And most people think kids don't see or don't know, and yet they do, right? So what pulled me to write that article was just to bring to light the fact that, hey, while you're fighting, or every time you raise your voice, anytime you're having an argument with your partner, someone's listening. And they are never too young to hear. They don't have to be speaking. They just need to be able to feel energy. And kids do feel energy, right? So they can't tell if there is any misunderstandings between a couple.
Right.
Or their parents, yeah.
Right. So the focus of that article then was on just bringing to light some of the misconceptions that people may have about children not being aware.
Most people think that children are too young. They are too young. And then there is the other misconception of, kids are resilient, they bounce back. We know with trauma that a lot of trauma that shows up in adulthood has childhood roots.
Yes.
Right? So we can't just say, kids bounce back. They may look like they've bounced back, but it's just under the surface of the skin waiting to pop out. Yeah.
And this definitely came up in a few conversations we had about raising children in the diaspora and all of those spaces. But to keep this in like the domestic violence piece, I know you and I had talked about whether or not there are any stats with regards to the severity of domestic violence here in Canada, or even in the Africa or the African diaspora communities. Are there any?
I kind of looked into stats. I don't have full stats, but I looked at an article that, because I really wanted stats in Alberta, I found an article that that did research in Calgary, and one of the shelters there, the research was in one of the shelters, and what they found was 70% of the children reported to have experienced domestic violence. Now there's two things there. Can children recognize domestic violence as the way we define it as adults?
Right, and how do we even define it as adults?
Exactly. So many times, and I think that's where the concept of intimate partner violence came up, to separate it from domestic, because domestic is broader, and which is why they talk of child abuse and elder abuse and so on. But what normally happens is there's a couple of things that through my other work has come out. A lot of black individuals will not really engage in, they're not going to go into the research to say this is what's happening, because many of them are afraid of even revealing what's happening in what they call the bedroom. We have a saying in Luganda, which is, ebyomunju tebitotolwa. You don't spill, I think in English it's like, don't spill your dirty linen or something like that.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
So we have, kind of stuff like that which protects information from getting out. And I really try to dig around, and it's easy to have stats on what's come out, but also is information actually getting out there? Who is willing to say that what I experienced,
yes,
right, is violence? And for children, can they describe it as violence, or is that how mommy and daddy are?
Right. And if mom or dad is unable to talk about it as the adults, then who's to say that these children have not been groomed to know not to the same thing? You don't spill
family secrets.
Exactly,
right?
exactly. Yeah. So I can see where it'll be hard to get started, especially within the Africa diaspora and communities. I thought that was just a Sierra Leone thing where we don't talk about. You don't talk about Bruno.
There are so many sayings out there that are cross cultures, but you don't talk about. You don't spill your family secrets. You don't talk about what happens in the bedroom. What happens there stays there. And so you find families where mom and dad continue as if nothing happened. And so the kids are confused, right? Because now you're waking up in the morning and you're acting like nothing actually happened.
Right.
So what was that? What happened last night?
Exactly.
So you leave them confused because they can't see maybe mom's wounded, or they can't tell that something happened. But
right. And like I said at the opening, where this is a real story, like this girlfriend of ours in high school, this was her love story. And it was a love story that we saw quite often in the community, where people actually look forward to being beaten up by their partners, and that's makeup that comes after that conversation, or whatever goes on behind closed doors that comes after. And that was what they understood love to be. So now coming into places like this where it is described, it is given a different name. How do we identify what domestic violence even is?
Right. And that is the question, because we also grew up hearing that if a man didn't love you, he didn't beat you.
That's
right.
That's
if
the
he
term.
loved you, he beats you, and I don't know if I would be okay with being beat up and being shown or told that is love. That would be not love for me. But and we confuse kids, because if this is the conversation or the information and the message that kids are receiving, that to be beaten is to be loved, this is where abuse continues around in a cycle, right? This is where generational patterns continue to be passed down like hand-me-downs.
Right.
Because it's, you're told that is what love is. It's really confusing. And so if this child grows up to be in a situation where they are not being beaten, does that mean they are not loved?
But that would even take it back to like an earlier age for the child, where they say you spare the rod, you spoil the child, right? So I think even as...
do you want me to go there?
Please.
Spare the rod, spoil the child. Oh my goodness.
But those are all terms that we heard.
Yeah,
right?
And those are excuses for people who don't have many alternatives. Because if we are to go down that route, okay, let me ask you something. If you spill your milk and I beat you, and then you go playing and you come back home and your clothes are dirty and I beat you, I call you 100 times and you don't respond because you're out of earshot, and then once you're within earshot, I am pissed and I beat you. Every time you do something that I don't approve of, I beat you. What message am I sending to you?
That I am worthy of being bitten. That I'm a bad person. I don't do anything right.
But you're also showing me that you don't have solutions. You only have one tool in your toolkit, which is beating.
To beat me up for everything.
Lack of tools is what gets people use that as their go-to. It's the only thing they know. They don't know have conversation. They don't know how to resolve conflicts. They don't, that's the one tool, the single tool in the single bullet in their gun, right? So that's all they use.
Right.
Because
like that.
you're not teaching a child anything by beating them for everything. The punishment does not fit the crime.
So there has to be crimes that are specific to, or that would warrant that kind of punishment, but not, or discipline rather. I better use the right word.
Discipline is another misunderstood word, because this correction, guidance, right? Those are things, like discipline is too broad. Again, it's another of those words that's misunderstood. Many parents use punishment where they beat up the kids and they call that discipline. And just because a child is now, they are doing what you asked because they're afraid of being beaten, does not mean they learned anything. You might think, oh yeah, now he's learned something because he's no longer doing X. No, he's not doing X because he's afraid of the pain that comes with the beating. But for you, the message comes and you think that, yes, now he's learned the lesson. There's no lesson learned. If you sat down and you asked him, what did you learn? He may say, not to make my pants dirty, or not to go playing outside. But really, is that the lesson? Is that the lesson you intended?
For that child to learn.
Right?
Yeah, probably not. Probably not.
Yeah.
And that child may never really know what it is you actually wanted them to learn.
Exactly. And you don't know, because sometimes if your child goes out to play in the rain and comes back messy, and you're annoyed with them and you beat them, what are you annoyed with? What's angering you?
Is it the rain, the child?
Is it the dirty pants?
Yeah.
Is it the, what is it? Like if you sat back and thought, why am I angry?
Why am I beating? You have to do?
Is it the work you have to do to clean up this child? Are you just doing it because when you grew up, your parents also beat you when you played out in the rain? Sometimes it's just a cycle. And if you sat down and actually asked yourself, why did I beat this child?
Can you come up with a valid reason?
And for many,
probably not.
There is none.
Probably not. So that's something that parents should think about. Is
there a different way you could, what message were you trying to send? Is there a different way you could send that message that doesn't involve beating? So if you didn't have beating on your cards or in your cards, what other card would you use?
Right, so challenging yourself to think outside of the box.
Absolutely.
And that would, so bringing that back then to like the domestic violence piece, because again, I feel like sometimes words are just thrown around for any and everything.
And that's domestic violence, by the way. That's a form.
Okay.
That's a form of violence.
Okay.
Beating up your child.
So that in itself is, that's why you say it's that umbrella.
Absolutely.
So domestic violence then is any kind of violence that happens in the home?
In the home.
Is that the definition?
Absolutely.
I never thought about that.
Yeah, most people keep it to intimate partner violence. Intimate partner violence is just between the intimate partners. Then what happens if it involves other members of the family?
Then
what do you call that?
That broader spectrum. Okay. So bringing it then to narrow it down to that intimate partner violence, given that it does affect the children somehow, like even say like that.
It's domestic family. Though.
Okay. So once it starts to affect other people of the home, it's not intimate anymore, it's domestic.
Because for one, it might be physical, depending on what form of abuse, right? What form of violence. Is it physical violence? Is it sexual violence? Is it financial? Is it, what form is it?
That's another piece.
And how does it impact others? Because if it's physical, intimate partner violence, and the kids are experiencing it, there's some emotional stuff going on here. And for this person who's receiving physical, it's not limited to physical, it's also emotional, right? So it's all layered, and everyone who's involved in whichever form
is
going to be impacted, yeah.
Can we put out a few sort of like examples of what to look out for that we can actually name domestic violence? Like, at what point do we name a behavior?
And yeah, that one kind of sometimes gets controversial as well, because like, it's just like when people beat up kids and justify it and say, yeah, but he was not listening. And I'm like, right? But, you know, we could use abuse as a different term for the violence, because violence is more, could be more explosive. But there is also the undercurrent, the kind of seeming silent things going on. But there is the sexual, there is the physical, there is financial, there is emotional, you know, there's verbal. All those do exist, because if you're verbally assaulting somebody on a daily basis, that's violent.
Like actually using verbally
words.
Abusive words.
Yes.
Okay.
Calling names and all of that. So if you come in and you are, you know, talking to your partner, your wife or husband with, you know, really abusive language, children are listening. And this person, if those words are cutting their soul, that's violent. To their soul, to their spirit. You hear that word being used. A lot of the people like using the B word. Others, you know, will use different other colorful.
I'm so against that word.
Yeah, others will use it. Exactly. So for you, when you say you don't like it, but if somebody comes and every time they're upset at you, your partner, and they call you the B word, what does that mean?
They are intentionally doing something that they know would hurt you because you have said you don't like it.
And if they don't know that you don't like it, you've never told them, it still cuts you.
Right. So is it your responsibility then to speak up?
Yes, it is your responsibility to speak up. But what I could say here is, while it is your responsibility to speak up, not everyone has been equipped to speak up. Some people have not been empowered enough to speak up. If you've been beaten down, if your spirit has been lowered so much, you may, and maybe you've spoken up before in the past, you might feel like it is not, you know, who's gonna listen to me anyway? Right? So you don't speak up.
You don't see the essence of saying anything anymore.
No. So, and also some people, you know, from childhood, if you've been beaten up every time you open your mouth, you grow up and knowing that you've constantly been silenced, hence the silenced young people. So if you've grown up being silenced all the time, then it becomes, you know, a little bit complicated to speak up. So for some people, they'll take that word. And have you heard of situations, and this has happened, you know, back home, where a woman, this is a violent expression, where a woman will take a nail while her husband is sleeping and put it in his head. Because it's...
Like, it actually happened?
Oh yeah, it happened. I've read it in the news, yeah. But it's because, like, he's done so much and she was so silenced, at some point it bubbles up. And when it bubbles up, who's the victim of that bubbling? Sometimes it's the kids. So many women are, you know, beaten up on, and when I say beaten up on, I'm speaking physically or figuratively. And so because they can't take it out on their husbands, they'll take it out on the kids.
Right. But even in that kind of situation, then, if you are silent for so long and you end up doing something that is now named the violence, then you become the culprit in a situation where you had been the victim. Where
the explosion is. And sometimes, because you kept quiet, the earlier question you asked me about people not speaking up. And then their speak up is an action. And sometimes their action is the explosion. And that's looked at or considered the violence, but what actually happened to you is not, because nobody knows about it. You kept it to yourself.
And sometimes even, I think, especially in our communities, as African diasporans, you reach out to people. You reach out to elders, you reach out to community members, you tell them what's going on. But they say, let's talk about it. Like, we're Africans. Let's maintain.
Let's pray about it.
Ooh. Ooh. You want to go there?
Do I want to go there? Do I want to go there? Do I want to go there? Let's pray about it. So here is the thing, and this is where part of my struggle is. Part of my struggle is we have a culture of collectivism where we rely on each other to lift each other up, to build each other up. I wrote a book actually. I forgot to bring it. My book is It Takes a Village to Wreck a Child.
Oh.
You didn't know that part, right?
It takes a village
to wreck a child.
And all I've ever heard is it takes a village to raise a child.
Yeah, and it's kind of, it has personal anecdotes of, growing up at the hands of so many adults who felt it was their responsibility to discipline me or to, fix me. And in the process, I don't know whether they fixed me or I went the other way. But it's an interesting read, so whoever wants to get it, it's called It Takes a Village to Wreck a Child. And it's on Amazon. And so part of it is, yes, our community can help us grow. However, in that book I talk about collective abuse, right? Where certain things become culture. And I always talk about how culture, we can have actually things we call culture when they are genuinely abusive. But we embrace them and we say it's our culture, it's our culture, it's our culture. I know this part is very controversial because we are always talking about maintaining our culture, keeping our culture values, da-da-da. But we also have to accept that sometimes our cultures have boo-boos. There are some sore spots. There are some abrasive parts of our culture that we have to name, we have to call out, and they have to be stopped.
Yeah.
So there's two things. You could go, from what you said earlier, you could go to your elders to talk. But if your elder suffered abuse and never said anything about it, right? And they kept quiet and they suffered through it, and maybe their kids paid, how helpful is that elders
to you? Woo!
And what is the elder going to actually tell you, right?
That's any different from what they
know.
From what the tool they give you is what they have.
Right? And so that's where you find things like, let's pray about it, let's talk about it, let's do this, right? So part of what ends up happening is we need to think about how do we solve this without perpetuating the same trauma or keeping the same patterns or repatterning the same thing. Because it's very easy to think you're finding solutions when you're actually repatterning.
Wow. There's a lot in there.
I know.
There's a lot to pull in there. Oh, I feel like this conversation needs multiple episodes. Like I always feel for some conversations. Yeah. But I like a few things that you said there with regards to we are who we know or what we know, right?
Yeah.
So going to have these conversations with elders who sometimes believe they have the solution to the problems, but they're only speaking from experience and stuff that they have endured, and they're only going to give you the tools that they have, which may not be any different from what you were doing already, right?
That's why I say a lot of patterns are hand-me-downs.
Yeah.
They're just hand-me-downs.
And I love that piece that you said about that holding on to culture, but at what cost?
Girl.
Some aspects of it, right? At what cost? Like, what are you paying for it?
Yeah, my work is under the umbrella of what I call the break-free zone.
A break-free zone.
The break-free zone.
The break-free zone.
And the reason that I named it break-free zone is because it's a space where I invite individuals to break free from cultural, those cultural ideals and ideologies that they don't want to let go of, right? So I invite people, in my spaces, I invite people to think about where they are located, culturally, where they are located in terms of values. That's a whole other podcast where I could talk about values.
Yes, please. We're coming back.
Because we talk about values, but most people name values that, again, were handed down to them. But if you sat them down and asked them whether they understand those values, or do they understand them in the same light as the people who passed them on did? I could give you a value, honesty. Does it mean the same thing? Because in Africa, for example, if the neighbor was looking for rent and they came looking for your father, do you give away your father? You say he's not home.
Your father would actually be the one to tell you. Tell them
I'm not home.
And then you go and you say, my father said it's not
absolutely
home.
But anyhow,
my father will not do that right away.
Yeah. So, but that's the thing, right? So sometimes what we have has been renamed, has been repatterned. It's just a recycling of the old stuff. It's the same thing, but it just keeps. If you don't take the time to take stock of what was handed to you, edit it, evaluate it, discard what you don't need, discard what misconceptions are, rethink, put it to the test, interrogate it. You have to interrogate those values.
Right. And before we go to the how to do that, I want us to quickly touch on a couple things that you mentioned. When you were talking about the different forms of violence and stuff, you had mentioned sexual violence. And I think we also mentioned that piece about where sometimes when intimate partner violence is going on, parents, whether mom or dad, tend to stay because they believe, I'm doing this for my children. I want my children to stay with the parents, like both parents, right? Yeah. But to touch on that, most married men or married women would say, I cannot sexually abuse my partner because they're my partner. Can we touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, but your partner is human, right? Your partner is human. It's like food. It's like when I watch parents force feeding their kids. I ask them, does anyone force feed you? If you're hungry, you'll eat. Nobody force feeds you. If a child is hungry, they'll eat. So it's the same with sexual violence, right? It's, and again, longer talk. But if your partner is not interested, right? Part of your job is to either get them interested or respect their
preference.
What would I do to get you interested? And we could go deep into the relationship piece here, but how would you get your partner where you are? How would you get them to where you are? Because if mom has spent time at work, come home, dealt with the whole getting dinner ready, thinking about tomorrow, getting kids to do their homework, and then you come in, not even with something small to say, hey, I know you're exhausted, I brought you something,
But you're expecting to be
But you're expected to be your needs to immediately be met as soon as you ask. I think, this is a deeper conversation which, goes into the relationship intelligence too. But that's how I look at it. That there is a lot more work that needs to be put into the relationship, but yes, it's possible for a partner to be violated.
So when you say no is a whole sentence. No means no.
No is no.
And it should be respected.
Yes.
And if it is not respected, then...
And if you don't want no's, find out, why am I getting no's? What am I not doing? If I want a yes, even a simple, hey, what would it take for you to say yes?
Yes.
What do I need to do for you to say yes?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Like, get into that. Get into the playfulness and...
Of
right?
things.
Yeah.
Okay. Beautiful, beautiful. So going then into like that whole piece about children, about parents, mothers or fathers, because I think domestic violence can be experienced on either
Yes,
end, right?
absolutely. And very many men are actually being violated by their wives and...
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a whole conversation
That's a whole
as to
podcast.
why some of them don't talk and don't
Yeah.
feel comfortable to actually come forward with their stories. But there's a lot of parents who say, I don't want to leave because I
Because
want
of
my
my
children to
children.
grow up with both parents. Can we speak to that a little?
Yes, we can. You don't want your children to leave because you want them to grow up with both parents. Are you the parent that you want your child to grow up with or being? Are you the parent that you would like your child to turn into? Would you keep around, if you're keeping around another parent who you feel is maybe violent, is that, remember, we are role models. Kids learn what they see, right? So if you're in a situation whereby this is what you're exposing them to, you are modeling for them what parenting is. You are modeling for them what relationships are. At any one time, you are modeling for your child. So if you're staying because of your kids, you're modeling for your kid exactly that. And you probably learned it somewhere. You probably saw your mother stay through abuse. You probably saw your grandmother stay through abuse. And so you're modeling that exactly. Again, goes back to keeping those patterns running in the family, handing them down like heirlooms. Right? So if you're keeping another partner around, you need to ask yourself, is this what I want my child to turn into? If it is not, you've got your answer. You can't keep that as the role model for your child.
Beautiful, beautiful. I know we're rounding up here because here time flies by really fast,
I noticed.
right?
I noticed.
But before we go, we've talked about what domestic violence is, what it's not, who are involved, the different layers within that umbrella. But can we give our viewers a tip or two, like a resource or two, what they can do if they're experiencing this situation? And let's say for someone whose voice may have been dummied down to the point where they feel like they don't have the power to speak up. Like, what can we say to people? What choices do they have if they find themselves in that situation?
Tips are tough because they are just tips, right? One major thing is if it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't right. You will know if it doesn't feel like, it's like when you eat bad food. You eat it and you're like, this food might do something to my belly. I don't feel good about it. So if it doesn't feel right, if the situation you're in doesn't feel right, it actually is not right. Now, one of the beautiful things about Canada, or many of these Western countries, is that there are supports available. And I know back home, those supports may not necessarily be available, but they are available here. Take advantage of them. The Sexual Assault Center is available. Go there. And if you're afraid of talking to someone, there are some universal signals that you can give. Like there are places you go to, and I know I've had some encounters where people are not even allowed to leave the house.
Yeah.
Right? It's really hard. But if you're stuck in a house, I will say this, if you're stuck in the house, and unfortunately when we are speaking to victims, also the perpetrators are listening. So they learn the tips that we give. Pay attention. Is there an Amazon driver dropping something off? Is there a post office person dropping something off? Is there a window where you can put something up that when someone looks up, they can see it? There's so much more. I know situations where people their phones have been taken away, and so they cannot communicate. But it's always possible to share information through silent messages. If you go to the shop with somebody, bathrooms are a good place to, go use the bathroom. In the process of using the bathroom, if someone comes by, let them know and then leave.
And now they put signs in most bathrooms. I've seen like restaurants and stuff. If you're going through domestic violence, maybe put a note or something. Like they leave some signals that can be used as
There
well.
are so many signals you could use, but the big issue is how do you know that you are going through domestic violence?
Right.
Because it's one thing to know and another thing to be experiencing it and you don't know. If it doesn't sit right, it probably is not right.
It's not right. Beautiful, beautiful. And that's a beautiful place to end it. If it doesn't sit right, it probably is not right. And if you're not sure, find someone to talk to. Hopefully a professional. Hopefully your parents are people that you can trust to have these conversations with, that would have your best interest at heart and be able to point out black for black, white for white, gray for gray, without trying to mix those signals. Oh my goodness, it's been an amazing conversation, and I really have enjoyed having this conversation with you. There's a lot of reasons why people would feel like they need to stay in an uncomfortable situation or in a situation that could cost them their lives, really. We've heard of so many horror stories of people who actually endured this domestic violence or partner violence and end up dying. Mistakenly, they'll call it, right? So don't wait for that time. Don't wait until you cannot speak up anymore. Don't wait until your children are grown and believe that that is the life that they should gravitate towards. Those are people they should attract because that's what they know life to be. Do something not just for you, but for the generations ahead of you. Let's change things one day at a time. If you are someone that says, oh, I just feel sorry for them because I don't think they have any other thing to do, or people, they would find someone else. Trust me. If it's not you, it's going to be somebody else, but don't let it be you. Thank you for staying with us. For those who have subscribed to our channel, mwah, we love you. Those who are still thinking about it, please go and subscribe. Until our next episode, I am your host, Becca, and this is the Dim Dim Podcast.
My people, we are so human, quick to judge and apportion blame. We think only about ourselves. Pointing fingers is so easy. Gossips at the